Welcome to Galactic Conundrums, where timeless love stories between stars and souls have the power to alter the very essence of existence. Enjoy. The atmosphere inside the Golden Nexus Casino was thick with a palpable tension, as if the very air was charged with secrets and unspoken wagers. The night, a blend of deep purples and neon greens, cast an eerie glow that seemed to pulse along with the sound of the rolling dice. The casino's walls shimmered with the same ethereal light, their surfaces reflecting off the polished floors, and the flickering neon signs overhead danced like ghosts. Caden Voss, a man whose face was etched with the scars of countless battles, sat at a table that seemed almost too small for his massive frame. His hands were steady as he pushed the dice forward with a practiced motion, the sound of them tumbling across the cracked, worn surface of the table ringing in the room like a warning bell. He was a man who lived between the shadows, whose presence alone was enough to send even the toughest patrons of this intergalactic den of luck into quiet retreats. But it wasn't the stench of Karelian whiskey that made the aliens around him step back. It was the look in his eyes, the cold glint that spoke of a life lived in violence, a man who had killed as easily as he breathed. 7. The dealer, a jittery crier, announced. His three eyes blinked rapidly in nervous anticipation. Caden barely spared him a glance. With the swift grace of a predator, he snatched up the stack of credit chips with one hand, pocketing half while holding the other half in front of his son's face. "See that, Eryk?" Caden said, his voice smooth and controlled, the words slipping out like a whisper on the wind. "When the dealer thinks you're drunk, he adjusts the gravity matrix to 1. You compensate by throwing the dice at a 70-degree angle." Eryk, a boy of only 16, straightened his shoulders and mirrored his father's movements, but his young face was still learning the cold truth of survival in a galaxy that showed no mercy. His wide eyes reflected the complexity of his father's teachings, the weight of each lesson, each word a stone in the foundation of the man he would become. "Remember what I always say, Eryk," Caden continued, his tone now turning almost playful, a slight grin tugging at his lips. "Life is a game. Play it like you're already the winner." Before Eryk could respond, Caden's eyes caught something across the room, a man in a sharp, expensive suit. A Tyranian businessman, his tentacles twitching in irritation as he watched the game unfold from a distance. Caden's gaze narrowed, a smile curling up at the corner of his mouth. This was where things would get interesting. "Now, watch your old man teach another important lesson," Caden muttered under his breath as he rose from his seat, his body language effortlessly commanding the space around him. He deliberately bumped into the Tyranian, causing the alien's drink to spill down the front of his pristine suit. The Tyranian hissed, his mandibles clicking with fury. "Watch where you're going, you filthy pirate." Caden's smile never reached his eyes. His tone was casual, but there was an underlying danger in his words. "Did you hear that, Eryk? This fine gentleman just volunteered for today's anatomy lesson." The movement was so fast that Eryk almost missed it. His father's hand, a blur of muscle and precision, slipping beneath the Tyranian's ribcage to find its secondary heart. One twist of Caden's wrist, and the businessman crumpled to the floor, his mandibles frozen in a final, shocked expression as his life slipped away. Caden wiped the blue blood from his hand on the alien's expensive suit, then gestured for Eryk to come closer. "Here. Feel this?" He guided his son's small hand to the wound that was still warm. "That's what life feels like when it's leaving," Caden murmured, his voice almost tender, yet carrying a cold finality. Remember the spot. 3 fingers below the 4th rib on a Terrellian. Different for humans. I'll show you that next time. Eryk, silent and unblinking, wiped the blood on his pants, his face impassive. No one in the casino had noticed a thing. Caden slid a few credits toward the bartender, who immediately turned away, pretending nothing had happened. Lesson 1, Caden said, his voice low but firm. Kill clean. Kill quick. And always tip the witnesses later. The Golden Nexus casino had faded into the background as Caden and Eryk made their way through the neon-lit streets of the alien city. The usual hum of gambling and the quiet murmur of secret deals still lingered in the air like an aftertaste, but Caden's mind was already elsewhere. Eryk walked silently beside him, his youthful energy a sharp contrast to Caden's world-weary presence. They had business to attend to, or perhaps just another night to survive. But as they passed the shimmering silver walls of the casino, something caught Caden's attention, a flicker of movement in a dark alleyway to the right. His instincts, honed through years of survival, made him pause. She's different. A figure stepped into the narrow light from a broken street lamp. She was a vision of mystery and grace. Zara Kaelen, her skin a deep shade of violet, the color of twilight at the edge of space. Her dark hair cascaded in waves, almost blending with the night itself, and her striking eyes, bright, blue, and full of defiance, glowed faintly in the dim light. She was breathtaking, yet she moved with a speed and urgency that told the story of a woman on the run, hunted by something far darker than just the usual criminal. Before Caden could blink, a group of mercenaries emerged from the shadows, their armored suits clanking with every step. They were massive, well-trained, and clearly accustomed to chasing down their prey. They called out to Zara in a language Caden couldn't quite place, but the tone was unmistakable, aggressive, demanding. Zara's movements were fluid, almost ethereal, as she darted down the alley, her hands glowing faintly, her powers flickering as she tried to ward off the mercenaries. Caden didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, his hand brushing against Eryk's shoulder, signaling the boy to stay back. The mercenaries weren't just here for a bounty. Caden could sense it in the air. Their tension was palpable, like a storm about to break. There was something much bigger at stake here, and Zara was caught in the middle. "Stay behind me," Caden muttered, his voice low and steady as he unsheathed his blade. Eryk nodded, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and curiosity, but Caden didn't give him time to question. He was already moving, his strides purposeful and deliberate. He closed the distance between himself and the mercenaries with terrifying speed, his body a blur as he wove through the chaos. The first mercenary didn't even see him coming. One slash, and he was down, his body crumpling to the cold, unforgiving ground. The others turned just in time to see the glint of Caden's weapon as it arced through the air, slicing through the shadows like a deadly dance. Zara didn't wait for the battle to end. In a flash, she was at his side, her hands glowing with energy as she sent out a pulse that knocked the remaining mercenaries off their feet. She moved with a ferocity that was unlike anything Caden had seen, and for a moment, the two of them fought together like an unstoppable force. But then amidst the violence and chaos came a shock. Zara's hand shot out, grabbing Caden's wrist with startling strength. Without warning, she pulled him closer, her lips brushing against his skin for a brief, desperate moment, And then, her teeth sank into his hand. Caden's eyes widened, the sting of her bite cutting through the adrenaline and rage of the moment. He froze, surprised not just by the pain, but by the connection that rushed through him in the instant that she bit down. The air between them seemed to shimmer with energy. It was like an electric shock, sharp and overwhelming, and it surged through his body, igniting a strange warmth in his chest. Zara pulled back quickly, her gaze meeting his. Her expression was a mix of confusion and urgency. "What?" Caden began, his voice hoarse. The air was thick with the aftershock of what had just occurred. But Zara didn't answer him right away. She just stared at him, her blue eyes widening in realization. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she whispered, her voice filled with something softer than anger, yet just as urgent. "But now, it's done." Caden felt it then, the bond. The connection between them. It was strange and sudden, as though fate had tied their destinies together in that brief moment of contact. He could feel her energy thrumming just beneath the surface of his skin, as if part of her was now alive within him. Before he could respond, Zara's hand shot out, her fingers brushing over his bite wound as she tried to heal it, but there was something in her eyes that made him pause. She's not just running from them, Caden thought. She's part of something bigger. "Who are they?" he asked, his tone low and intense, as he surveyed the mercenaries regrouping in the distance. Zara didn't answer right away. She turned away, her gaze scanning the horizon, as if the truth was too dangerous to speak of. "They aren't just mercenaries," Zara said softly, almost to herself. "They are part of a larger war. One that's been brewing for centuries. And I'm caught in the middle of it." The weight of her words hung in the air, and for the first time, Caden felt something else, something beyond the thrill of battle. It was a spark of understanding, a knowing that their fates had crossed for a reason. His mind raced as the pieces began to fall into place. "You're not just running from a bounty, are you?" Caden asked, his voice softer now, a mix of curiosity and something more. Zara met his gaze, her eyes narrowing, as though she had been expecting him to catch on. "No," she replied. "I'm running from the truth. And I don't know if I can escape it." Caden stepped closer, his voice low and steady. "Whatever it is, we'll figure it out together." Her lips twitched, a brief but genuine smile playing at the corners of her mouth before she turned to face the mercenaries again, her hands glowing once more. "Let's see if we can survive first," Zara said, her voice like a promise. "Then we'll talk about the rest." Scene 3, The Bite Bond. The flickering lights of the alleyway finally settled into stillness as the last of the mercenaries retreated into the darkness. The air, thick with the acrid scent of burned ozone and spilled blood, seemed to vibrate with the aftershocks of the chaos they had just survived. Caden stood tall, the weight of his blade in his hand now replaced with a strange, heavy silence. Beside him, Zara leaned against the wall, her violet skin shimmering in the dim light like the calm after a storm. Her breathing was heavy, but controlled, and the faint glow that had danced beneath her skin earlier was slowly fading, leaving only a subtle warmth behind. She glanced at him, her eyes sharp, filled with an intelligence that had seemed too much for someone so young. "I didn't ask for this," she muttered, the words hanging between them like a fragile thread. Caden, still processing the adrenaline and the lingering sting of her bite on his wrist, glanced at her with furrowed brows. His mind was a whirlpool of thoughts, each one crashing into the other with more questions than answers. Ask for what? Caden's voice was low, still tinged with the coolness of someone who had just come out of a battle unscathed, but there was a flicker of curiosity beneath his guarded tone. Zara shifted slightly, her gaze never leaving the stars overhead, as if they held the answers she could not bring herself to speak aloud. I didn't plan for this bond, but it's part of who I am. Who we are, now. Her fingers brushed lightly over the wound she had left on his hand, the mark of their connection, a mark that pulsed with an energy neither of them could fully understand. Caden's mind raced as the implications sank in. A bond? Between them? You bit me, Caden said bluntly, glancing at her as if trying to wrap his mind around the reality of what had just happened. And now we're, what? Connected. Zara's lips quirked up in a faint, knowing smile. Not just connected, she replied, her voice soft but carrying an undeniable weight. In my culture, it's more like a biological contract. You're my protector now, whether you like it or not. I'm bound to you, and you are bound to me. Caden narrowed his eyes, running his fingers over the spot where her teeth had punctured his skin. The wound was healing, but the feeling remained a subtle pulse, a strange warmth, that ran through his veins whenever he thought of her. It was like an invisible thread linking them, a tether that wasn't just physical but alive, humming beneath the surface. And if I don't want to be bound? He asked, a hint of humor laced in his voice, though his mind remained clouded with a realization that he had no choice in the matter. Zara met his gaze, her eyes reflecting a sadness that wasn't entirely her own. You don't get to choose. Not anymore. Once the bond is formed, it's unbreakable. We're linked in a way that transcends everything else. My people believe it's destiny. That when two souls connect like this, it's because they are meant to be. She paused, the weight of her words sinking deep into the air between them. Caden's lips pressed together in thought, the romanticism in her words not lost on him, but the practicality of the situation quickly overshadowed it. You don't seem like the destiny type, he said dryly, his tone laced with a wry humor that only someone with his life experience could possess. Zara chuckled, a low, melodic sound that felt like a soft breeze on a cold night. I'm not, she admitted, glancing at him with a hint of a smile. But that doesn't mean I can ignore the reality of it. There was a long pause between them, and Caden couldn't help but feel the weight of the bond, pulsing between them, pressing into the air like a silent storm. He wasn't sure if it was the adrenaline from the fight, or the bond itself, but there was something undeniable about the way his senses seemed sharper when she was near. Her presence stirred something inside him, a strange, protective instinct that was too foreign to his hardened existence to be ignored. He cleared his throat, trying to shake off the tension. So, what now? He asked, the gruffness in his voice masking the uncertainty he felt. He had lived his life by one rule: survival. Now, survival seemed to involve something much more complicated. Her. Zara straightened, the brief smile on her lips fading into a more serious expression. Now, we keep moving. Keep fighting. The enemies we face aren't just mercenaries. They are part of a much bigger war, one that I'm trapped in, whether I like it or not. And with you tied to me, you'll be dragged into it too. Caden was quiet for a moment, processing her words. The magnitude of what she had said began to sink in. His life, his quiet existence as a mercenary had just been turned upside down. The bond between them, this strange connection, wasn't just a twist of fate. It was the beginning of something much larger, something neither of them could control. He looked at her, the sharp edges of his past slowly melting away in the warmth of this unexpected alliance. "So, we're in this together now, huh?" he asked, his voice softer, almost as if he were accepting the inevitable. Zara's eyes softened, a hint of understanding passing between them. "Looks like it," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. And just like that, Caden knew. The universe had thrown them together for a reason. And no matter how much he wanted to fight it, he was in it for her, and there was no turning back now. And with that, the two of them, the mercenary and the fugitive, prepared to face whatever lay ahead. Together. The flickering lights of the alleyway finally settled into stillness as the last of the mercenaries retreated into the darkness. The air, thick with the acrid scent of burned ozone and spilled blood, seemed to vibrate with the aftershocks of the chaos they had just survived. Caden stood tall, the weight of his blade in his hand now replaced with a strange, heavy silence. Beside him, Zara leaned against the wall, her violet skin shimmering in a dim light like the calm after a storm. Her breathing was heavy, but controlled, and the faint glow that had danced beneath her skin earlier was slowly fading, leaving only a subtle warmth behind. She glanced at him, her eyes sharp, filled with an intelligence that had seemed too much for someone so young. "I didn't ask for this," she muttered, the words hanging between them like a fragile thread. Caden, still processing the adrenaline and the lingering sting of her bite on his wrist, glanced at her with furrowed brows. His mind was a whirlpool of thoughts, each one crashing into the other with more questions than answers. "Ask for what?" Caden's voice was low, still tinged with the coolness of someone who had just come out of a battle unscathed, but there was a flicker of curiosity beneath his guarded tone. Zara shifted slightly, her gaze never leaving the stars overhead, as if they held the answers she could not bring herself to speak aloud. "I didn't plan for this bond, but it's part of who I am. Who we are, now." Her fingers brushed lightly over the wound she had left on his hand, the mark of their connection, a mark that pulsed with an energy neither of them could fully understand. Caden's mind raced as the implications sank in. A bond? Between them? "You bit me," Caden said bluntly, glancing at her as if trying to wrap his mind around the reality of what had just happened. "And now we're, what? Connected." Zara's lips quirked up in a faint, knowing smile. "Not just connected," she replied, her voice soft but carrying an undeniable weight. "In my culture, it's more like a biological contract. You're my protector now, whether you like it or not. I'm bound to you, and you are bound to me." Caden narrowed his eyes, running his fingers over the spot where her teeth had punctured his skin. The wound was healing, but the feeling remained a subtle pulse, a strange warmth, that ran through his veins whenever he thought of her. It was like an invisible thread linking them, a tether that wasn't just physical but alive, humming beneath the surface. "And if I don't want to be bound?" he asked, a hint of humor laced in his voice, though his mind remained clouded with a realization that he had no choice in the matter. Zara met his gaze, her eyes reflecting a sadness that wasn't entirely her own. "You don't get to choose." Not anymore. Once the bond is formed, it's unbreakable. We're linked in a way that transcends everything else. My people believe it's destiny. That when two souls connect like this, it's because they are meant to be. She paused, the weight of her words sinking deep into the air between them. Caden's lips pressed together in thought, the romanticism in her words not lost on him, but the practicality of the situation quickly overshadowed it. "You don't seem like the destiny type," he said dryly, his tone laced with a wry humor that only someone with his life experience could possess. Zara chuckled, a low, melodic sound that felt like a soft breeze on a cold night. "I'm not," she admitted, glancing at him with a hint of a smile. "But that doesn't mean I can ignore the reality of it." There was a long pause between them, and Caden couldn't help but feel the weight of the bond, pulsing between them, pressing into the air like a silent storm. He wasn't sure if it was the adrenaline from the fight, or the bond itself, but there was something undeniable about the way his senses seemed sharper when she was near. Her presence stirred something inside him, a strange, protective instinct that was too foreign to his hardened existence to be ignored. He cleared his throat, trying to shake off the tension. "So, what now?" he asked, the gruffness in his voice masking the uncertainty he felt. He had lived his life by one rule: survival. Now, survival seemed to involve something much more complicated. Zara straightened, the brief smile on her lips fading into a more serious expression. "Now, we keep moving. Keep fighting. The enemies we face aren't just mercenaries. They are part of a much bigger war, one that I'm trapped in, whether I like it or not. And with you tied to me, you'll be dragged into it too." Caden was quiet for a moment, processing her words. The magnitude of what she had said began to sink in. His life, his quiet existence as a mercenary had just been turned upside down. The bond between them, this strange connection, wasn't just a twist of fate. It was the beginning of something much larger, something neither of them could control. He looked at her, the sharp edges of his past slowly melting away in the warmth of this unexpected alliance. "So, we're in this together now, huh?" he asked, his voice softer, almost as if he were accepting the inevitable. Zara's eyes softened, a hint of understanding passing between them. "Looks like it," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. And just like that, Caden knew. The universe had thrown them together for a reason. And no matter how much he wanted to fight it, he was in it for her, and there was no turning back now. The stars stretched out before them, endless and cold as they drifted farther from the dangerous fringes of Kandar 4. The hum of the ship, the stargazer, was the only sound that filled the small, dimly lit cabin. Caden stood by the control panel, his fingers lightly grazing the buttons as he kept the ship on course, but his thoughts were elsewhere. The recent battles, the unexplainable bond between him and Zara, the looming danger, it was all starting to feel like a tangled web, one he wasn't sure how to untangle. Zara, seated across from him, had been unusually quiet for the past few hours, her gaze fixed on the stars outside the viewport. Her violet skin shimmered under the soft light, but the usual confidence that danced in her eyes was now replaced by a distant, haunted look. It was a look that made her seem like she was somewhere far away, trapped in the memories of a past she couldn't escape. Caden noticed her silence, and his curiosity got the better of him. "You've been quiet," he said, his voice low, but steady. "Something on your mind?" Zara's eyes flickered toward him, and for a moment, it seemed like she was going to push the question aside. But then, as if she had been carrying the weight of the truth for far too long, she sighed and stood, walking to the viewport. She pressed her hand against the cold glass, her fingers tracing the outlines of distant constellations as if they could offer some kind of solace. "Yes," she said softly, her voice breaking the silence like a whispered confession. "There's a lot on my mind, and none of it is good." Caden turned, his instincts urging him to press, but he remained silent, sensing that this was a moment she needed to share on her own terms. Zara's fingers paused, hovering over the cold glass, her violet eyes clouded with memories. "I was born into power," she began, the words slipping out like a weight that had been held too long. "I'm the daughter of Empress Astrilla, the ruler of the violated Imperium." Astrilla wasn't just a queen, she was a symbol of peace, of unity in a galaxy that had been torn apart by war. "My mother, she brought balance to a universe that had lost its way." Zara's voice cracked slightly as she spoke, the pain of her memories flickering through her words. "But she was betrayed," she continued, her gaze hardening. "Betrayed by someone who was supposed to stand by her side. Lord Thane Cryas, he was her most trusted advisor, the one person she believed could help her build the Imperium's future. But in the end, he stabbed her in the back." Caden's eyes narrowed, his hands instinctively curling into fists. "Cryas. That name's familiar." Zara's face twisted into a grimace. "He's a snake, Caden. A monster who craved power more than loyalty. He orchestrated a coup, killed my mother, and left me to die in the chaos." She clenched her fists at her sides, as if trying to physically keep the rage at bay. "He betrayed everything my mother stood for, and now, he controls the Imperium with an iron fist." Caden, who had seen his fair share of betrayal, could feel the anger rolling off Zara like a storm about to break. But this was more than just anger, it was grief, and it was fear. The loss of a mother. The fear of a power-hungry tyrant taking everything she had once known. Zara turned from the viewport and faced him, her eyes full of a fierce determination. "The war Cryas started didn't stop with my mother's death. The galaxy's still in flames. And now, I'm his next target. He wants control of the entire Imperium, and he knows that the key to that power is me." She paused, her voice steady but laced with the weight of her words. "Every faction, every mercenary, every criminal group, they all want me because I carry the bloodline that could restore the Imperium." Caden listened carefully, the pieces of her story falling into place. This wasn't just some random fugitive on the run. Zara was the heir to a powerful empire, one that had been torn apart by betrayal and war. And now, she was carrying the weight of her mother's legacy on her shoulders. "And that pendant you're always wearing?" Caden asked, his voice calm but probing. "What's its significance?" Zara's hand instinctively went to the pendant around her neck, a small, intricately carved crystal that glowed faintly in the dim light of the ship. She glanced at it before meeting his gaze. "It's the symbol of my family," she said quietly. "The key to the Stargate network. The network predates modern hyperspace travel and connects the farthest reaches of the galaxy. With it, anyone can control the flow of travel and trade across the entire universe." She hesitated, her gaze distant again. My mother controlled it. And now, it's the only thing standing between Cryas and total domination. Caden's eyes widened slightly. Stargate Network. The power to control travel between star systems. It was beyond anything he had ever imagined. And it was now hanging around Zara's neck, a precious relic, and the very thing that made her a target for every power-hungry creature in the galaxy. You're not just a runaway princess, Caden said, the realization dawning on him. You're the last piece of a puzzle that could either save or destroy the entire galaxy. Zara looked at him, her face softening just slightly. That's why I can't stop running, Caden. As long as Cryas is alive, as long as that pendant exists, I'm a target. And everyone I care about, everyone I've ever loved, is at risk. For a long moment, they stood in silence, the weight of her words hanging in the air like the heavy hum of the ship's engines. Caden's thoughts churned as he processed everything she had just shared. He had known she was running from something dangerous, but he hadn't realized just how deep the roots of her past went, nor how high the stakes were for both of them. Don't worry, Caden said, his voice unexpectedly steady. You're not alone in this anymore. Whatever it takes, I'll keep you safe. Zara looked at him then, her eyes reflecting something she hadn't shown before, a glimmer of trust. It was brief, but it was there. And for the first time since their paths had crossed, it felt like she wasn't running alone. Thank you, she whispered. Did you enjoy this story? Do you think their journey has only just begun? Or is there so much more waiting for them out there? Leave your comment below. Galactic Conundrums always wants to hear your thoughts. Let's keep the story going. The Stargazer rocked violently as it shot through the vast emptiness of space, the hum of the engines a steady reminder of the chaos unfolding around them. Caden's fingers gripped the controls, his knuckles white as the tension in the cockpit thickened. Zara stood behind him, her eyes scanning the distant stars through the viewport, her usual calm demeanor now replaced with a flicker of anxiety. You feel that? Caden asked, his voice low as the familiar rumble of distant blaster fire echoed through the hull. Zara nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. They are closing in. A flicker of movement outside the ship caught Caden's eye, and he knew immediately they were in for a fight. Dozens of small, heavily armed ships materialized from the shadows, their sleek, dark forms cutting through the stars like predators closing in on their prey. It wasn't just mercenaries this time. They were joined by a squad of cultists, their ships adorned with symbols that burned with a menacing red glow. Get ready, Caden muttered, setting the Stargazer into evasive maneuvers, his hands steady on the controls. The cultists' ships were faster, more agile, but Caden was a master of maneuvering in space, his instincts honed by years of running from danger. Zara's fingers hovered over the console beside him, her violet skin glowing faintly as she prepared herself for what was coming. The bond between them pulsed with an odd synchrony. As Caden focused on piloting, Zara seemed to tap into something else, her energy, her power, ready to unleash. Hold tight, Caden said with a grin, his gaze momentarily catching hers. It was a playful smirk, the kind that only came out in the heat of action. This is going to get interesting. The first barrage of blaster fire lit up the darkness, striking the Stargazer with a resounding thud. The ship shuddered, sending Caden's heart into his throat, but he fought to maintain control, sending the ship into a sharp roll that evaded the next volley of shots. The cultists weren't just aiming to disable them, they wanted to capture. Caden's instincts told him they were after something specific, but what? Zara? Take the wheel, Caden barked, pushing the controls over to her. I need to take out their lead ship. Without hesitation, Zara's fingers danced over the controls, adjusting the ship's shields and weapons with ease. The faint pulse of her violet energy intensified, swirling around her as she linked with the ship's systems in a way that felt almost otherworldly. Caden grabbed his blaster, his eyes locked on the incoming enemy ships. His pulse quickened, his mind narrowing down to the immediate threat. He couldn't afford distractions. Not now. In a blur, he launched himself out of the cockpit, sliding into the ship's secondary weapons bay. The ship's automated defenses were great, but Caden preferred a more personal approach when it came to fighting for survival. Outside the Stargazer, the battle intensified. Zara's calm voice echoed through the comms as she fired at incoming ships. Her shots were precise, each one hitting its mark with deadly accuracy. Caden couldn't help but notice the way her energy pulsed in time with her actions, her body moving as though she were in tune with the ship and the universe itself. Meanwhile, Caden made his way to the ship's weapons turret. Aiming with practiced precision, he fired relentlessly at the enemy ships, watching as their shields buckled under the strain of his attacks. One by one, they began to fall back, their vessels breaking apart in the vacuum of space, debris scattering like broken stars. But the lead ship, the one piloted by the cult's highest commander, was still on their tail. Caden narrowed his eyes, locking in on the target. With a swift motion, he pulled the lever, engaging the ship's most powerful weapon. The Stargazer's cannon fired in a burst of bright blue light, cutting through the vacuum of space like a laser blade. The cultist ship exploded in a ball of fire, its debris spiraling out in all directions. That's one problem solved, Caden muttered to himself, his heart still pounding from the battle. Now, let's deal with the rest. As the remaining ships scattered, Caden returned to the cockpit, finding Zara at the helm. She was still focused, her expression a mixture of relief and exhaustion. Her energy, while powerful, was clearly taxing. It had taken everything she had to maintain control over the ship and deal with the cultists. He leaned against the console, breathing heavily. "You're amazing, you know that." Zara glanced at him, her lips twitching into a faint smile. "I do what I have to," she replied, her voice quiet but confident. "We can't let them catch us." "Not yet." Caden studied her for a long moment, his gaze softening. There was more to her than just power and strength. There was a vulnerability there, hidden beneath her bravado, something that made him want to protect her even more than he already did. "Zara," he said, his voice a little softer than usual. "What are they really after? Why chase you across the galaxy?" Zara hesitated, her violet eyes flickering with something unreadable. She lifted her hand, the pendant around her neck glowing softly as she ran her fingers over it. "This," she said simply, holding the pendant out in front of her. "The Stargate network. The key to the entire galaxy. Whoever controls it controls the fate of the universe. And that's why they are hunting me." Caden's mind raced as the significance of her words hit him. "That pendant, it's more than just a symbol of your family. It's the key to everything." "Yes," Zara replied, her voice steady but tinged with sadness. "And that's why they'll stop at nothing to take it from me. But as long as I'm alive, they won't have it." The silence between them hung heavy, but this time, it was different. It wasn't just the weight of their shared danger that bound them together. There was trust now. A quiet understanding. "I'll keep you safe," Caden whispered, his voice brushing softly against her ear. Zara met his gaze, and for the first time since they had met, she smiled genuinely, with a softness that spoke volumes. "I believe you." The bond between them, forged through battle and shared danger, had grown stronger in ways neither of them had expected. It wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about something more profound, something that neither of them fully understood yet. But as the stars streaked past them and the stargazer sailed into the vast unknown, they both knew one thing for certain: they were in this together. The planet Alari Prime loomed before them, a jewel in the vast emptiness of space, its shining spires and crystalline domes reflecting the faint glow of distant stars. The capital city, a testament to imperial grandeur, stood tall and proud, a symbol of a power that had long been stolen, now clinging desperately to its fading control. Caden stared at it through the cockpit's viewport, a mix of anticipation and grim resolve settling in his chest. Zara, standing beside him, remained silent, her gaze locked on the planet below. Her violet skin seemed to pulse softly in the dim cabin light, but the intensity in her eyes was unmistakable. She was closer than ever to reclaiming what was rightfully hers. And yet, the weight of her family's loss, the empire she had been robbed of, pressed heavily on her. "You ready for this?" Caden's voice was a quiet murmur, his hands steady on the controls as he adjusted their course toward the heart of the imperial capital. Zara turned to him, her lips curling into a brief, determined smile. "I'm not sure if anyone's ever truly ready for something like this," she replied. "But I don't have a choice, Caden. It's time to take back what's mine." The stargazer sliced through the planet's atmosphere, the hum of the engines growing louder as they descended toward the capital. The city unfolded beneath them like a grand, labyrinthine structure, gleaming towers stretching toward the sky. But for Zara, it was a reminder of everything she had lost: the life, the power, the family. As they neared the city's core, the unmistakable thrum of approaching ships rattled through the ship's hull. They were here. Cryas had already been informed of their arrival. "They've sent their welcome party," Zara murmured, her voice hardening. The landing pad was a battlefield in waiting. As the stargazer touched down with a soft, reverberating thud, Caden and Zara quickly prepared for what was to come. Zara's eyes gleamed with purpose, but beneath it, there was something else: a flicker of the old wounds she had carried with her all these years. Caden placed a hand on her shoulder, a brief moment of reassurance, before the ramp lowered, and they stepped out into the storm that awaited them. The battle begins. The landing bay was a vast expanse of polished stone, the gleam of military-grade weapons gleaming under the artificial lights. Cryas soldiers, heavy-set, armored figures lined the space like a wall, their weapons aimed with deadly precision. At the far end of the bay, a figure clad in dark armor stood, his presence suffocating, like a storm cloud waiting to break. "Lord Thane Cryas. You think you can take this from me?" Cryas' voice was low, almost amused as he stepped forward. "You, a princess without a throne. You are nothing now, Zara." Her eyes locked onto him, the anger simmering beneath the calm mask she wore. "I am everything you will never be," she said, her voice cool, but the weight of her words was enough to send a shiver through the ranks of his soldiers. Caden's hand twitched at his side, fingers grazing the hilt of his weapon. But Zara was the one who made the first move. With a swift, practiced motion, she raised her hand, sending a surge of violet energy through the air, knocking two soldiers off their feet. Caden charged forward with the deadly grace of a seasoned fighter, his blaster spitting fiery streaks of light as he took out two more soldiers in an instant. The clash of metal against metal and the searing buzz of blaster fire filled the air, creating a cacophony of violence that seemed to shake the very foundations of the landing bay. A desperate struggle. Zara was at the center of it all, her violet skin shimmering with power as she unleashed wave after wave of energy. The soldiers were fierce, but they were no match for her, not when she had the full force of her bloodline awakening within her. She could feel it now, the connection between herself and the pendant around her neck, its power coursing through her, guiding her movements with an almost unnatural precision. Caden, meanwhile, moved through the chaos with ease, his blaster a blur in his hand as he struck down anyone who came too close. His eyes never left Zara as she fought, his focus unwavering, instinctively covering her back. He was more than just her protector now, he was her ally in the truest sense, moving as one with her in the chaos of the battle. But Cryas wasn't finished. The moment Zara's eyes met his, he smiled, a cruel twist of satisfaction playing at the corners of his lips. "You really think you can take the throne, Zara?" Cryas taunted, his voice reverberating through the bay. He snapped his fingers, and the soldiers moved in tighter, pushing back with an unrelenting force. But Zara's resolve only hardened. She was done running, done hiding. With a roar, she released a burst of energy so intense that it illuminated the entire landing bay, knocking back every soldier in its wake. Caden was at her side in an instant, their movements perfectly synchronized as they cut through the remaining forces like a blade through air. And then, it was just the two of them. Cryas stood alone, his eyes now filled with the recognition of defeat. "You've won the battle, but the war?" he sneered. Zara's eyes gleamed with fire as she stepped forward, her gaze unyielding. "The war was never yours to win, Cryas." The final confrontation. She raised her hand, the pendant glowing brighter now, its energy swirling around her like a storm. The air crackled with anticipation as she focused all her power on the man who had destroyed everything she loved. Cryas, realizing too late that his fate was sealed, took one last step back. But it was no use. Zara unleashed a pulse of energy, one so powerful that it shattered the very foundation of the bay, sending Cryas flying backward into the wall with a sickening thud. He crumpled to the ground, unconscious, his forces scattered in the wake of the blast. Caden stood beside her, his chest rising and falling with the rush of adrenaline, his eyes never leaving her face. "You did it," he said quietly, as if still processing the gravity of what had just happened. Zara turned to him, her violet eyes softening for a moment, her breath steady but heavy. "It's not over," she said, her voice carrying the weight of 1,000 lifetimes of pain. "But it's a start." For the first time since they had met, Caden saw something else in her eyes, something vulnerable, but also something hopeful. Zara had reclaimed a piece of herself today, and together, They had taken the first step in a long journey to reclaim her throne. The grand hall of the Imperial Palace on Alari Prime was a sea of glistening marble floors and towering columns, each one etched with intricate designs that told the ancient history of the violated Imperium. The air smelled faintly of lavender and ozone, a strange but comforting mix. Zara stood at the center of the hall, her back straight, her expression unwavering as she faced the gathered assembly of the Imperium's highest officials. The weight of the crown was symbolic, but in her hands, it felt like the weight of the galaxy itself. The ceremonial crown, a delicate band of platinum and iridescent crystal, rested on her brow, gleaming under the bright lights that illuminated the grand hall. It was a perfect fit, but for a moment, Zara felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't just a crown, it was the embodiment of everything she had fought for. It was the symbol of her family, of her people, of the future she was about to reshape. Caden stood at her side, his presence a silent reassurance. He wasn't just her protector anymore. His role had transformed, and though he stood in the shadows of the Imperial throne, the bond between them had only grown stronger. He had become more than an ally, he was now her confidant, her equal in ways that neither of them had expected. Zara glanced at him from the corner of her eye, catching the faintest hint of a smile on his lips. His quiet support was a comfort, but even he couldn't stop the storm brewing in the shadows of the palace. The throne room was filled with the whispers of the nobles and generals who had long since pledged their loyalty to Zara's late mother, Empress Astrilla. But in this moment of triumph, there was an undertone of skepticism, of uncertainty. Zara could feel it like an itch beneath her skin, the murmur of distrust from those who had secretly placed their faith in Lord Thane Cryas. His death had left a vacuum, and power was a seductive force, even for those who had been loyal to the crown. "Your Majesty," the Grand Chancellor said, stepping forward, his voice tinged with formality. "We are grateful for your leadership. The Empire is now yours to command." Zara nodded, her eyes steely as she regarded the room. "Thank you, Chancellor. But the road ahead is not as simple as wearing a crown. My reign begins with the people, not the throne." Caden watched her, his gaze never leaving her face. She was no longer the fugitive she once was. Zara had become the empress her mother had envisioned, strong and unyielding. But Caden knew that beneath that unshakable exterior, there was still the weight of the past, the ghosts of betrayal, of loss, and the responsibility of leading an empire that had once crumbled. As if reading his thoughts, Zara turned slightly to meet his gaze. Her eyes softened, just for a moment, before her expression hardened again. "We've fought for this, Caden. But now the real work begins. I can't rule from a throne made of glass." Caden stepped closer, his voice low. "You'll make them see what they are too blind to understand. You've earned this." But the moment was fleeting. From across the hall, a sudden movement caught Zara's attention. A shadowed figure, hidden among the sea of faces, had risen. The voice that followed was sharp, cutting through the air like a blade. "You've made a grave mistake, Zara," said General Lather, an old ally of Cryas, his face hard and twisted with venom. "Your mother was a good ruler, but you are nothing more than a pretender to her throne." The room fell into an uncomfortable silence, the tension rising like a storm cloud on the horizon. Zara's grip on the armrest of her throne tightened, but she didn't flinch. Her voice, when it came, was calm and unwavering. "General, you overestimate your position. I am not a pretender. I am your empress. And you will show the respect due to your ruler." Zara's eyes bore into Lather's, unflinching. Lather sneered, his voice low and venomous. "Respect? The respect you've earned is built on the ashes of your mother's death. You think I'll follow a woman who has nothing to offer but the legacy of failure?" Before Zara could respond, Caden stepped forward, his posture stiff with authority, his eyes narrowing as he addressed the general. "You speak of failure, Lather. But who failed in the battle for the throne? Who sided with the traitor, Cryas? You'll follow her because you have no choice. Betrayal has no place here." There was a long, charged silence. Then Lather took a step back, his arrogance momentarily faltering. Zara stood, her movements fluid and confident. "I will not tolerate insubordination," she said firmly. "Those who refuse to bow to the rightful ruler will not find peace in this empire." Her words rang in the hall, a promise and a warning. It was a message for all of them, those who supported her and those who would plot against her. The road to reclaiming the throne would not be without its challenges. It would be filled with betrayal, lies, and treachery, but Zara was prepared for it. She had already survived the worst the galaxy could throw at her. This empire would be hers. As the nobles and generals bowed their heads, Zara turned to Caden, her eyes catching his for a brief moment. There was a flicker of something unspoken between them, something deeper than just loyalty, something that had been forged in the fires of war and trust. Caden's gaze softened as he looked at her. She was no longer the frightened girl he had first met, but a leader in her own right. And as much as she had earned her crown, she had earned his respect and his unwavering loyalty. "Whatever comes next," Caden said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm with you, Zara. Always." Her lips curled slightly, a rare smile breaking through her usual reserve. "And I'll never ask you to leave my side." The chaos of the battlefield seemed to stretch endlessly before them, the sounds of clashing metal and explosions filling the air as Zara and Caden pushed forward through the wreckage of what had once been a place of power. The ruins of the imperial capital were scattered around them, burnt-out ships, shattered buildings, and debris littered the ground like the broken pieces of a fractured empire. But through the smoke and dust, Zara stood tall, her violet skin glowing faintly under the alien sky, her eyes steely with resolve. Caden was beside her, his sharp gaze never leaving the surrounding chaos, his blaster at the ready. Their movements were in perfect sync, a dance of destruction. They fought together like they had been forged for this moment, every strike, every shot, every calculated move bound by the invisible thread that connected them. "Ready for this?" Caden asked, his voice a mix of challenge and affection, his lips curling into a wry smile as he glanced at Zara. Zara didn't need words. She just gave him a nod, her eyes intense, filled with the same quiet strength that had seen her through every battle. Her hand reached out, brushing his briefly in a gesture of comfort and solidarity before they charged forward again, cutting through the last remnants of their enemies. The battlefield had become a final proving ground, a place where they would settle the debts of the past. The last of Cryas' loyalists had rallied here, their forces a ragtag group of mercenaries, traitors, and fanatics, but they were no match for the power that stood before them. Zara, with the strength of her bloodline and the fire in her heart, was unstoppable. And beside her, Caden, her protector, her partner, was a force in his own right. Together, they moved like one being, their bond more than just a partnership. It was something deeper now, something that transcended battle, beyond mere survival. Their connection was woven through every glance, every touch, every breath shared between them. It was as if they were no longer two individuals, but an unstoppable unit, forged by destiny. As they cleared the battlefield, the last of their enemies fled into the distance, broken and scattered. The moment of triumph hung in the air like a breath held too long. They had won. The enemies were defeated, the Empire was secured, but there was still something unspoken between them. Zara turned to Caden, her breath steady but her heart racing. The air between them was thick with unspoken emotions, everything they had been through together, the sacrifices, the battles, the trust that had been built over time. They had come so far, but something was shifting. The tension in their eyes spoke of something deeper. Something more than a connection of allies, more than mere comrades in arms. "You know," Caden said softly, his voice low, almost a whisper as he wiped the sweat from his brow, "I never thought I'd be standing here, with you, after everything." Zara's eyes softened, the fierce fire in them dimming just slightly as she looked at him. Her lips parted, but she didn't immediately respond. Instead, she closed the gap between them, her violet skin shimmering in the dim light of the battlefield, the intensity of their shared gaze building with each passing second. The connection between them pulsed, undeniable, like a magnet drawing them together. In one swift motion, she reached up, her fingers grazing his cheek as she stepped closer, their breaths mingling. Caden's hand found hers, and for the first time since they had met, the uncertainty, the hesitation, melted away. There was no more need for words, no more room for doubts. Their lips met in a kiss, a fierce, passionate kiss that was the culmination of everything they had been through. The battle, the pain, the triumph, the bond, they all fused into that single, electric moment. It wasn't just the sweetness of victory or the relief of survival. It was something deeper, something primal. It was the recognition that they had been bound together not just by fate, but by choice. Caden's hand slid to the small of her back, pulling her closer as the kiss deepened, a fire igniting between them that no war, no enemy, could ever extinguish. For a brief moment, the universe around them disappeared. The stars, the battle, the Empire, they all faded into the background. It was just them together, strong, and united. As they broke apart, breathless and with hearts pounding, Zara looked at him, her smile both tender and fierce. "I never imagined this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Never imagined I'd be standing here, in this moment, with you." Caden's lips curled into a grin, his eyes full of warmth and something far deeper. "I think we both have a lot of surprises left for each other." But the weight of the moment wasn't lost on him. They had defeated their enemies, and in doing so, they had claimed more than just the Empire. They had claimed each other, and that bond was something that could never be broken. Together, they were not just rulers of the galaxy. They were its future. Zara turned her gaze to the horizon, where the remains of the battle still smoldered in the distance. Her face, once filled with uncertainty and fear, now radiated with a quiet confidence. She was ready for the throne, for the galaxy, for whatever lay ahead. And beside her, Caden would always be there, her protector, her partner. "You and I," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of the universe itself. "We've changed the fate of this empire, but I think we've also changed the universe." Caden nodded, his hand finding hers once again. "Together, we'll change it all." And as they stood there, side by side, in the ruins of the old empire, they knew that their journey was just beginning. Together, they would face the future not as individuals, but as a pair bound by love, power, and destiny. As Zara and Caden stood side by side, their hearts bound by more than just destiny, they knew their journey was far from over. The universe, with all its mysteries and dangers, lay at their feet, waiting for them to carve a path of their own. Together, they had overcome the darkest of shadows, but what awaited them beyond the stars was even more unknown, more thrilling, and more dangerous. As the galaxy watched their rise, the whispers of their love echoed through the cosmos, a love so powerful it defied the boundaries of space and time. It wasn't just a story of survival, it was a tale of passion, of power, and of two souls bound together by the unbreakable threads of fate. But with new challenges on the horizon, Zara and Caden's adventure was far from over. What was next for the universe's most unlikely rulers? What mysteries would they uncover? And how far would their love take them across the stars? The answers are waiting, and the galaxy is watching. What do you think will happen next? Leave your thoughts and theories in the comments below, because the adventure is only just beginning. The universe has a way of revealing its greatest secrets, but only for those brave enough to seek them.